All right. Hi. So today, there are no slides. Today is the demo. And so today we're going to kind of show you how to build your first app. So hopefully you already have Xcode installed. And I'll kind of start from the very basics of just like there's no starter code today. We just open Xcode, start a new project from scratch. And I'll kind of walk you through how we'll set up your first app. And this is going to be very relevant for your second project. So if there's any parts where you have questions, feel free to raise your hands. We have two TAs. Sorry, we have a TA and we have my co-instructor Elvis over there to come help you. And yeah, so what we'll be building today is kind of a version of this app, but it won't be Jeff Bezos, it'll be somebody else. And the idea is there is kind of a label up here. There's like an image and there's a button you can click around and it does things. There's like a little bit of text down here, and you can also be like, "Hi, you look very cool." All right. So yeah, you'll be building that today. Okay, cool. So first things first, right? Let's start up Xcode. So I'm just going to do that. Oh, also, if you notice on the side here, I kind of set up like a keylogger so you can see the commands that I'm using. I think it's very helpful because a lot of the times there are like faster ways to do things, and sometimes I like unconsciously do it. So just that is just to make sure that you see what I'm doing. If you at any point there's like something that's not clear, feel free to stop me and I can explain what I'm doing. So cool. So when you open up Xcode, it should look kind of something like this, right? And you want to do create a new Xcode project. So that will open up this screen. Okay, it is recording. I got a little scared there. Okay, so back to the screen, right? So we have Mac OS, Watch OS, blah 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 blah. Forget that for now. We're just gonna kind of go in the iOS side here, and we're gonna pick apps here. And if you go next, then you have this screen. So over here, you want to just type in the name of your product. Say you're building an app for the hack challenge, you will think of a creative name. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just gonna call it demo 2. Okay. The team should just say your own name. If there's anything else, then just as long as it's not red, it's fine, right? And this organization identifier, bundle identifier, just don't touch it. But what it actually is just say, for example, you're working across different teams, then each team would have its own identifier, so the apps don't kind of conflict. Finally, the two important things you want to pick here. One is that you want to pick storyboard, not SwiftUI. Though we're not even going to be using storyboard, but I'll show you more of that later. And the second thing is here we want to use Swift and not Objective-C. Okay, and don't check anything down here. You won't be using this. Yes, hello.
There's nothing in my organization identifier, but it's not letting me click next and it's like things.
Okay. Can you help? Cool. So yeah, hopefully this should work for most people. And if you click next, and then I'll tell you where to pick it. I'll just put it on my desktop. Give it a little while. And it should build, or you should get the screen. Now, this is your first kind of keyboard shortcut. Yes, what's up? Okay, yeah. Oh, he'll come to you right after. Okay, so one. No, just leave it. Don't touch it because it pre-fills with something. Yeah. Okay, so after this screen loads up, let's just make sure that we kind of have something running, right? So you see this triangle up here. This is the run button. What it does, it just runs your project. And what it should do, you should get this little phone pop up on your screen, right? And this is kind of your bargain iPhone, which you don't have to pay money for. But the idea is that this is a simulator, and it will run it will like simulate the app that you're building, and you get to interact with it on your computer. Now, it may look a little different, right? If you didn't change anything up here, you may get like an iPod Touch or something. So what you want to do is if you have a preference for a phone, you can come up here and you can pick your favorite phone. So I will have less options than you because I deleted the ones that I don't want to use. But my personal favorite is the iPhone 14 Pro because that is the phone I don't have. So I'm going to pick that. All right. So that is very bare bones setting up the project, right? So now I'm going to do this very kind of important step for people who have older versions of Xcode. So notice how I didn't have to do anything, right? And the app is able to build and just shows me this white screen, which is kind of like the default view controller. For some people, this may not work directly, and you may have to delete this thing called main, or it's basically the storyboard. Now, there is a detailed step of what I'm doing right now on the textbook, right? It's under the cheat sheet sections of setting up a new project. You can reload your screen a couple of times to make sure you have the most updated information. But the idea here is that it shows you exactly what I'm doing. Maybe some of the text is a little old, but the idea is like basically the same, right? You create a new app and you can create new files. Now, this is kind of what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to delete this thing called main storyboard because we're not going to be using storyboards. We're going to use layouts and constraints, which Elvis talked about yesterday. So I'll quickly walk you through this. But for some people, this is not required. But it's like fine if you do it anyways. Okay. So first thing, you want to go here and you want to delete this thing called main. So if you right click on it and you just click delete, and move to trash, poof, it's gone. First step. Next step is you want to go into this thing called info plist and delete this main storyboard file. Now, for some people, if like the main or like info plist doesn't show up, it just says like info down here, right? What you can do is you can press Command, Shift, and then F. You see down here, it's Command, Shift, F. And then this search screen, this search little bar, actually, make it a little small, make it bigger. Pops up, and you can just type in main here. Press enter, and then you're going to get these occurrences of main. Now, we don't want main anywhere, right? Because we're not going to be using the storyboard. So now we're going to go ahead, go into info plist here. It should show you somewhere, main. Go here and you click delete. Okay. And you go here again, and it should show you, I search one more time. Now it's gone, right? So those two don't really matter. Now, finally, you also want to delete this last one inside info plist. It says storyboard name here. Click on it, just press delete. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, no, not delete this one. This one you have to click the minus sign here. Okay. Now that was all set up, okay? Like nothing here was like specifically required if you have like Xcode 13. But for some people with older versions, this step is kind of important. So now if I run it, the key difference is that now it should look a little different. It should just give me a black screen, right? Because I deleted the storyboard. The white thing just now was the storyboard. So now I want to kind of like show something, right? Like I don't want this to be my app, right? So now this is another setup stage. But the idea here is that, oh, let me get my iPad. But the idea here is that you want to kind of tell your project what the startup screen looks like, right? Because right now it's loading the app, but there are no screens, there are no view controllers. So all right. So for people who have followed along here, now you just want to open the scene delegate. Now, this is the final line of setup. I promise after you do this, we can actually start building the app. So what we're doing here is that we're specifying, when the app starts, what do I want to show? So first thing you want to do, a lot of this is kind of just set up, but first you want to basically create a window scene. And you can just follow along here. So what I did here is, you can ignore this error for now, but I basically created a window scene, right? Assuming that my app has a window scene. Now, is this a setup question? No. Yes. Okay. Of course. Sorry. My bad. Okay. So they're actually, since we're building iOS apps, it doesn't really matter what a window scene is because you don't really have to work with it all that much. But this is really relevant if you're building on iPads because recently with kind of the iPad becoming bigger and better, you are able to have like 2 apps run simultaneously in like one kind of iPad screen, right? So those are separate like window scenes. And this is why we have to do this extra step just to make sure that our app is able to kind of display fully. This is the first line. And the second line is you also then want to make sure that, what the window is the kind of main window for our scene controller. I'll explain what all these are right after I finish typing them out. But again, this is all set up, and you can also find this on the textbook just to make sure that every time when you start up the project, it is set up correctly. Okay, so what did I do here, right? I created a window, right? This is kind of just making sure, right, that my app is displaying. Otherwise, if I don't have a window, my app is just running in the background and nobody can see it. Then I basically say, okay, now I want to create like a view controller. So now this should sound familiar, right? Which Elvis talked about yesterday, on Monday. But this view controller corresponds to this file up here, and that's the actual file that we'll be developing on. So I created my kind of home screen, or like this root view controller. And then I made sure that whatever my window is, right, the thing I'm going to be displaying, has the view controller as what I'm displaying. Now finally, this is just set up, right, making sure that like the app's window is the window, and I make sure that it's visible. Okay, like you don't ever have to like know what's going on here, but this is just like I'm explaining it just so that like, say in case we ask you, then you know it, right? But like this is just a setup that you do once and you can just forget about it ever, like forever. Okay, cool. So does anybody have any issues doing this? Okay, cool. So now let's make sure that everything I did just now was correct. So as I said just now, right, I'll make it a little bigger, but this view controller is where we're going to be actually building the app. So let's just make sure that this is actually what I'm displaying. So I'm just going to go ahead and just make the background color just like pink. So now, so you see, down here, Command S was to save, Command R was to run and build the project, right? Command R is the same as just clicking on this button up here, but what it does is it kind of just builds the project and then makes my simulator kind of display the project. Now, why is it not pink? Okay, cool. So I just restarted it. I built the project again, and I did the exact same thing, and now it works. So, okay. Does this not work for anybody? So is it just a black like screen for you too? Okay, so one fix is that don't delete main, because for new versions of Xcode, you don't have to delete main. And that can cause some issues. So that's just one thing I did just now, and now it works. So yeah, what's up? Yes, the scene delegate code. And so the scene delegate code is also on the textbook. So if you go here and you scroll down, this is the exact same thing that I did just now. Okay, cool. So just to make up for lost time, I'm going to try to make sure that I make progress in this demo, and I may have to release like a bit after in case I don't have time to cover some stuff. But let's see how far we can go. Okay, so let me just go back to what we're building today, right? We're building, not this one, this is the broken one. We are building this. Now let's quickly dissect what this is over here, right? This is this kind of label up top, right? Remember we use labels to display short lines of text. Then there's this image underneath, it's a button. And then we have a chunk of text. Now remember from lecture on Monday, when we're displaying multiple lines of text, we want to use kind of a UITextView, right? Because that natively supports multi-line text. And then finally, we have this little comment section on the bottom, which I doubt we'll have time to go to today, but it's there just in case we do have time for that. All right. So let's get started. So the first thing, I'm going to work from top to bottom. It doesn't matter which way you do it. You can go from bottom to top. You can go from left to right. As long as you're systematic, the way that you kind of set up your constraints will make sense. So make sure that if you're going to work and set up a screen, work in like the same direction. I suggest just going from top to bottom because it makes the most sense for me. So first of all, when I want to create a new kind of component on the screen, what I want to do is I want to create a variable for it, right? Because say later on I want to change its properties, then I want to be able to reference to that kind of component or that item. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a name label. So var name label, and it is equal to a UI label. So what I did here is I created a variable called name label, and it stores a UI label. So right now it's kind of just this empty blank UI label. And so I need to set things, right? I need to set things to make sure that it displays the right content. So the first thing we notice is we want to make sure that it says, we want to make the text to show Jeff Bezos. And we want kind of the text, the color of it, right? We want the color of it to be black. So I'm going to set the text color to be black. So one thing I did there notice how when I was typing things out, I never had to type the full word, right? A lot of times, kind of Xcode does a lot of auto-completing for me, and all I do is I just kind of go up and down with my like this. I just go up and down, right, with my arrow keys, and I'm like, okay, I want you, and I press enter, right? And this is going to be very common because there's a lot of these names that you don't really want to be remembering. But if you generally remember what they look like, you type the first couple characters, Xcode will kind of auto-complete it for you, and then you press enter, and you can just do that. Okay, so this is kind of the color that we want to set, and we also want it to kind of look a little bit bold. So I'm going to set its font to be font size, let's just say 20, and I'm going to make it bold. Okay. Finally, I'm going to set this thing called translate auto resizing mask into constraint equals false. Now, this is an absolute mouthful, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know exactly what it does. I know generally what it does, but I want to say this, you don't have to know what it does. Okay, the idea is that in order for you to use kind of these programmatic constraints, which is what we're doing here, right? We're setting components relative to other components in terms of code, right? That's called programmatic constraints. In order for that to work, you must set that property into false. Okay, so this is a very common mistake, right? So people come to office hours like, oh, why are my things not displaying? And we ask you, did you set this to false? You say no. So make sure you check for that. Just remember that all kind of these components from UIKit, you must set this translate auto resizing mask into constraint, set that to false. Okay, cool. So after I set all its properties, now I want to add the view or add this name label to my view. Cool. So now we created the label, we set its properties, we added to the view. Now we need to tell kind of Swift and Xcode where this label is going to go. And the way we do that is we use these constraints, so auto layout, auto ns constraints. There we go. Okay. And then we activate these constraints. And so here comes another quick trick that I like to use, right? So notice how right now kind of Xcode is highlighting over this text and it's blue, right? Now, if I press enter, it just kind of autofills what's supposed, like the structure of it should be. So over here, it's saying, okay, this is like going to take in an array of constraints. And I delete this and I just start putting in my constraints here. So I'd be like, x dot constraint, blah, 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 y dot constraint, blah, 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 right? That's where we're going to put our constraints in here. So right now, I'm kind of specifying the constraints for this label. And this label, I know, is going to go kind of from the top, right? So first, I'm going to constrain its top anchor to the view's top anchor. Now, I did one thing here, right? What I did is basically I'm taking my label, which I just created, and I'm saying this label's the top of the label has to be equal, or like I'm constraining it to be equal to the view's top anchor. Now, remember from lecture on Monday, we talked about this idea of safe area layout. And, old phones, like I think before the iPhone 6S probably, it doesn't matter, right? If you use top or safe area layout.top. But now we have these bezels, remember, right? So to make sure that we account for these bezels, instead of doing view.top top anchor, we do view.safe area layout guide.top anchor, right? And that's basically saying, okay, the top of the label now is the top of my view. And I'm just going to add a little bit of a constant. This is like a bit of an offset, right? So I'm saying, okay, your top is equal to that top, but let me move it down just a little bit. And remember, Elvis showed you this image on Monday, but the idea is this way is positive in the x direction, and down is positive in the y direction. So I'm going to move it down just by 20. Okay. So that's kind of the first constraint. Now I'm going to write the rest of the constraints, right, to make sure, not only do I have to tell it where it is on top of the top, but I also say, in terms of the x direction, right, where it's supposed to go. So I'm just going to constrain its center x anchor to be equal to the view dot center x anchor. What that basically says is I'm going to center my label. So now if I run it, we should see. Oh, okay, I think I forgot. So by default, after you delete it, the color of the background is black. So I'm going to set the background color to be white. And then we see this label, Jeff Bezos, up here. Okay, cool. First label. Anybody have any issues with building that? So yes. So now as you know, as you kind of build out these components, right, this is going to start becoming second nature, because the step is 1, right? You create a variable for the component. 2, you specify the properties of the component. 3, you constrain it and you put it on the screen. And then you rinse and repeat, right? You do it for the image, you do it for the text view, you do it for the comments. Demo over, right? No, but I'm gonna keep showing you, right? So that's the first step, right? So now let's keep going. Now let's move on to the second part, which is now the image. So in order to kind of display an image, I need an image of Jeff Bezos. So I'm just gonna take one right now. And okay, this one looks rather square, so I'm just gonna pick this one. I'm gonna check it on my desktop, and I'll come back to it later. Okay. So now I want to create an image. So I'm going to call this profile image view. So to kind of store and display an image, what we use is called a UIImageView. And a UIImageView, okay, I can show you right here. A UIImageView, profile image view, has a property of image. And what is it? It's kind of just like you can think of it as like a frame, like an image frame, right? Like it doesn't actually have an image in it, but you can put an image into it, right? It's like a photo frame. Yeah, that's the word I was going for. So you know, I have my photo frame. Now I need to put an image into it, and over here I will specify an image. Now, okay, one thing here is that as I typed out UIImage and I press the open parentheses, there are a bunch of different ways I can create an image, right? So if you're interested, you can go and read what each of these do. But the most easy way to kind of work with an image is using this named property. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just saying, okay, I have provided you an image with these names. Can you look it up for me? That's basically what this is doing, right? So I'm just going to call this Bezos. And you know, I say I have a bunch of images, right? But where are these stored? They are stored in this asset over here. So right now I have nothing, right? But I'm going to just rename this as Bezos, and I can put it in here. And you can see there is now an image called Bezos, and it is of Jeff Bezos. So now I go back to my view controller, and I can continue to set the properties for this image. So actually, I'm going to do something that I didn't plan. I'm just going to speed up a little bit here, but I'm just going to skip over some of the properties, and I'm going to show you how ugly it looks, and then I'll show you the properties to make it look a little better. Okay, so just make sure, you know, because we're going to you're going to constrain this as well. So make sure you set the translate auto resizing masking into false, and this is some important things to make the image look good. Okay, so now I created the image view. I set its properties. Now I need to constrain it, right? So you can see that, you know, the more things I have on my screen, the more cluttered this kind of array will get, right? And eventually, if I keep doing it like this, you have this array with like 50 billion lines of code in it. And if someone else tries to debug your code, they don't want to, right? Because it's going to be really hard. So what we can do is we can just, this is like syntactical stuff, but the idea is that you can just first say like, okay, this is the constraints for the name label, and you create a separate one, right? So I copied and pasted it there, but you create a separate one for the profile image view. And in here, we're going to specify kind of the constraint properties for the profile image view. So when someone else comes and look in your code, they're like, aha, the image view has an issue. Then they scroll to the corresponding part, and they're like, here is where the constraints are. Okay, so I get the profile image view. Now I specify where it is, right? So the idea of having these constraints is that we want everything to be relative to each other. So I already so this is kind of the completed version, but just now, if I showed you the half completed version, I already have the label up here, right? So now I want to put the image underneath the label. So I'll be constraining the image with respect to kind of the positions of this label. So the top anchor, kind of the top of the image, is going to be constrained to be the name label bottom anchor, right? So the top of my image is the bottom of the label, right? And I don't want it to just be sticking on it. I'm going to give it a little bit of a padding or an offset. I'm going to say 20, right? Okay. And similarly, I want this to be in the middle. So I'm just going to do profile image view dot center x anchor dot constraint equal to view dot center x anchor. So what this line of code basically says is the middle of my profile image I'm going to set that to be the middle of my entire view. And so now if I were to run it, right, the image shouldn't actually show up. And this is kind of another thing I want to talk about here. This is the second most common mistake. In fact, it will even crash, right? And the reason why this crashed is not because Xcode is bad again, right? This time is because I didn't add the image. I didn't add the profile or didn't add the kind of the component to the view. So if I don't add it to kind of the view, so like, this is like the view, right? If I don't add it, then I'm not able to constrain it, right? Because in terms of like what the app or what kind of Xcode is reading, it doesn't think that it exists. So you can't constrain something that doesn't exist, right? So you have to make sure that you also add it to the parent view, okay? And so now it should actually show up, but it's going to look a little ugly. Oh, okay, it doesn't look any ugly. Okay, but the idea was I was going to show you is that if it's really big, right? If the original image was really, really big, then you won't see like the image, you'll just see like his nose, for example, right? But I guess the kind of the input image was rather small, so it looks rather okay. But a few things to kind of make the image look good, right? First of all, you can like specify the size. So when you constrain the size here, you can also constrain the size. You can do profile image view dot width anchor dot constraint, and you can say that you want it to be, I forgot what to say here. I want it to be 200, and I want the height to be 200. And it looks a little more reasonable, right, in terms of size. And then I can also add, some rounded corners maybe, right, just to make it look a little cuter. So I can do profile image view dot layer dot corner radius is equal to 5. So that'll kind of round off the corners just a little bit, right? The larger the value, the more round it looks. So now that, I mean, you can't see it, but it is a little bit rounded. I can make it a little bigger actually. Okay. Maybe it's not rounded. Oh yes, that's why. Because okay, good. This is a good mistake. So the idea is that I'm kind of making the frame, right, be round. But the idea is that I didn't say, like what happens if the image is bigger than the frame. So I need to make sure that if I'm going to set any type of kind of corner radius, I also need to specify what happens, right, when kind of the image is larger than the frame. And the property that you want to do is you want to set clips to bound to be true. So the idea is that, when something overflows, it gets cut off, right? Clips to bound. And so then now it looks a little rounder, like his forehead. But anyways, so now let's keep going. Now we added the image, we added the name. Now let's also add the button, right? So that I can show that I'm actually like following and unfollowing this figure. So again, right, rinse and repeat. I'm going to create a follow button is equal to UIButton. And I'm going to set its properties, right? So I'm going to do follow button, right? Dot set title. I'm going to say this is follow. And so these are called states. So the idea is that, when you don't click on the button, it's in the normal state. When you click on it, it's like selected. And sometimes, like, for example, you're trying to like log into something, but they didn't type in their password. Then the login button will be disabled, right? Until they type in the password. So usually for like 99% of the time, you're just going to set to normal. And then you also want to, you also want to kind of set the title color to be some color, right? I'm just going to use blue because that's the example that I used, but you can feel free to explore any color you want. And then finally, I'm going to make some rounded stuff to make it look a little better, but this is again, like not exactly required, right? This is just to make it look visually better. Dot here dot border color is equal to UI color dot system. And then I'm going to just round its corners. And then finally, probably the most important thing that I need to set is the translate auto resizing masking into false. Okay, I set the title, I set some colors, I set some rounding kind of properties of the button. And, that's cool and all, right? What's the most important thing about a button, right? I want to click on it, right? And so right now, if Okay, well, it shouldn't show because I didn't constrain it yet. But right now, if I were to actually constrain everything, right, the button won't do anything, right, because I didn't specify what to do. And that's where, remember from Monday's lecture, the add target function does, right? We want to make sure that the button has some behavior when I click on it. And so that's where the idea of adding a button or adding a target comes in. So we add target. And the target is self. Self here is kind of like the main view, right? So like, where do I want the behavior to happen when I click the button? The answer, kind of this view, right? And the action is going to be kind of a special function that you describe, right? In fact, I'm going to create the function first. I'm going to come down here, create a function. I'm going to call it did select follow button. Where I just created a function here. And now one important thing you need to add is this thing called the Objective-C decorator. And you don't have to know too much about what this specifically does, but the idea is that if you want to kind of define special behavior of a button, which is what we're doing here, you need to create a function as the first step, and you also need to add this decorator. Okay, so what I want to happen when I click on this button, for now, I'm just going to print out followed, right? Just to make sure, right? See if the button actually works. So I want to create a selector and see how it says, right? Objective-C function. This is where you would put in the select follow button function and just the name, right? Don't actually call the function here because you don't want to call it just yet, right? You want to pass in the function, and then when you click on the button, this function will be called. And then finally, the for event is just kind of like, what happens to the button in order to trigger this button, trigger this event. And the idea is just when you click on it, touch up inside, it will trigger the function. Okay, so now I'm going to go a little faster for this setup stuff because this is the third time I do it. I'm doing this, but the idea is the same, right? I'm just constraining it and I'm laying it out on the screen. Where did I put it? Here, okay. So same thing here. Follow button. And then I do button. And I'm going to constrain the top of this to the bottom of the profile image. Constrain 20. I don't care about, well, I do care about the width and height, but I'm going to say the width and height is 150. Oops. Okay, what happened, right? So 10 seconds. Can anybody tell me what I forgot to do here? Yes. Exactly, right? I didn't add it to the view. So now if I run it one more time, we see our cool button. And if I click on it, it says followed, 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 right? And okay, so one thing that I'm going to skip over for time reasons, because I want to show you the last part, which is required for your assignment. And so what I'm skipping over here is this idea of state, right? Because as you see from the old demo here, when I click on it, it changes, right? It changes from follow to following, right? And the way you implement this, I'll just go over the high level detail, is you'll create a variable here called is followed, which is like a Boolean, and it starts off as being false. So at the beginning, when I launch the app, I'm not following anyone, right? And so when I click the button in here, you would be like, you would change the is following, right? You'll be is followed is equal to not is followed. This basically just flips the value that's stored in it. And, based on if it's followed or not, you would change kind of how the button looks, right? So you give it a different color, you give it a different title, etc., etc. Okay. So this is the setup stuff that I'm going to skip over for now. But if you have any questions about how this works, you can come to office hours. And in fact, if you look at the recording from last semester, I do actually show how to do this. So hopefully this isn't too much to skip over. But what I do want to show you right now is how do I display this, right? This big chunk of text, because this actually is surprisingly confusing. So in terms of setting it up at the beginning, it's still the same idea, right? I created a text view. So text view is, bio text view is equal to UITextView, and I just create it, right? I create a text view. And then the same thing here, right? I define some properties. So I'm going to do bio text view, and I'm going to define its text. Okay, so I need Jeff Bezos's bio real quick. Jeff Bezos. Tell me something about you. Okay, wow, so cool. Okay. Okay, so I have the text in here. Oh, okay, this looks a little ugly. Let me just delete this line. Doesn't really matter. Okay, it's not complaining. Nice. So I have Jeff Bezos's bio, right? And now I want to kind of just display this, right? So I define the text, and actually there's some other things that I need to set, right? But I'm going to skip over them for now, and I'll show you why this is really important. Text view, missing stuff here. And then now I just do the adding stuff, right? Make sure I do view.add subview, text view, and I constrain it. So now this is actually probably the most important part about a text view, and that's, you know how previously over here, right, when I'm setting the properties, for example, for the label, I just set its top, and then I just set its, its center, and then that's it, right? I don't have to set anything else. So what's specific to a text view, the bio text view, is that you need to specify all four kind of sides of it, right, in order for it to display properly. And the reason why is because text views are designed to have a lot of text. And when the text kind of overflows the size you set for it, it kind of becomes a scrolly thing, which you may see from your iPhone before, where you have a large chunk of text, right? If you're reading a news article or something, as you scroll, right, your phone doesn't like move, right? Like the phone stays still, but the text on the screen scrolls. And so in order for that to work, you need to kind of tell the app, right, how big you want the text view to be. And the way you do that is you specify top anchor, the bottom anchor, the leading anchor, and the trailing anchor. So the top anchor, bottom anchor, leading anchor, trailing anchor. Okay, so one quick trick I'm going to do here. This is too big. One quick trick that I'm going to do here is if I hold down Alt, which is the button next to Command and Option, right, and I just drag my mouse here, I can edit multiple lines of code at once. And so I can be, bio text view, and now all of these are now bio text view. Okay. And so I'm constraining these anchors. Okay, I don't know why this is erroring, but we can forget about this for now. So where do I want the bio text view to be? I want it to be underneath my follow button. So I'm going to say its top anchor is equal to the follow button, bottom of it, plus a little bit of twin. Similar thing here. I want this to be equal to, I want the bottom anchor to equal to the views bottom anchor. So this is kind of the view.safe area layout guide.bottom anchor. So this is the entire phone's bottom anchor, right? And remember, right, for the y direction, positive goes down. So if I want it to go from the bottom but up a little bit, I need to go negative 20. Okay, so now leading and trailing, right? That's kind of like the left and right if we're in in an English-speaking country. But the idea is just you want to make sure you account for everything, right? So the way you do that is you set the leading anchor and the trailing anchor of my text view to be equal to the leading anchor and the trailing anchor of the parent view, right? So, if it's left to right, then it's left to right. If it's right to left, then it's right to left, right? You can forget about like any other nuance there is. And, just don't want to stick too tightly, so I'm going to add a bit of padding again. Okay, cool. So now it should display. And did it. So what went wrong here, right? Okay, well, so I forgot to set the translate auto resizing masking thingy. So this is what happens, right? If you forget to set that. But there's one other thing that I want to show. Right? And is that sure the text works here, right? And I can scroll, right? This is the idea of the reason why we want to specify, the bounds of it. But I can also just edit it, right? I can click on it and I can just delete it. Right? And you don't want that to happen, right? Because, if you create an app, you take forever to build it, and somebody goes on the app and just deletes your text, you're gonna be pretty pissed, right? So the idea is that you want to make sure that you also specify that the is editable field is false for your text field. And then it should do what it's designed to do. Okay, cool. Oh, it's spilling over because, sorry, the trailing anchor is kind of the right-hand side, right? It needs to go the other way, so it's negative 20. And so this is the end of the demo. Okay, so for your project, you'll be building something very similar, right? But it's going to be not of Jeff Bezos, it's going to be of something else. And you can find the You can find the specification of the project in the textbook over here. You give it a second to load. You give it a second to load. Give it a second to load here, right? And so it will kind of just tell you everything that you need to do for the project. It's pretty detailed. You can feel free to click around there. I will also be sending out a ed announcement about well, so we have a feedback form for you guys to do, which is for extra credit, and it will also have the link to the project description in the ed announcement. So those are the two ways you can learn more about the assignment. Okay, any questions before we dive into the Kahoot and wrap up? Cool. All right, so let's go into the Kahoot. Oh, I have 4%. Okay. We'll close this. All right. Anybody having issues joining? Okay. Yeah, my thing is also lagging. I also have 4%. Okay, my battery's going down even though I'm charging. So I guess I'm going to stop the recording here because Zoom is taking up a lot of my battery. But if you have people who kind of want to know the Kahoot stuff, then I can like record it and post it afterwards. Yeah. Okay. So we're still gonna do the Kahoot, but I'm just gonna stop recording here. Sorry.